Yeah, so welcome to the Core podcast.
Thank you.
We're down here in San Francisco, in Oakland.
Thank you. Yeah,
right?
It's Oakland. Get it right, man.
It's Oakland,
It's not San
okay.
Francisco.
Wait, is San Francisco, I guess Oakland is a complete separate city?
Yeah, the area would be called the Greater San Francisco Bay Area.
Okay.
But colloquially, San Francisco is the city and
Okay.
Oakland is the town.
Okay, so I could say I'm in the Bay Area, in Oakland more specifically,
Yeah,
something like that.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that works fine.
Okay, all right.
But it's not San Francisco.
All right. I learned something today. So, you're Patrick Miller. You
That's
have
me.
been in fighting games for a very, very long time. I guess, like, how did you get started in all this? I know you have like a martial arts background
Sure.
too.
That actually came after fighting games.
Really?
Yeah. So I guess the best way to explain this is I was born in the mid-'80s, and Karate Kid is pretty big. Ninjas, also pretty big. Everyone was doing like martial arts in their action films, stuff like that. Ninja Turtles was like my first kind of like biggest obsession when I was young, right?
Yeah.
And growing up, I guess because I was exposed to all that kind of kids entertainment and action and like media, I think I just kind of assumed that like hand-to-hand combat was a natural part of an adult's like life,
Okay,
right?
yeah.
So I was always kind of fascinated with it.
Yeah.
And Street Fighter 2 came out when I was like 6 or 7 years old. What some of I think the younger generation who are newer to fighting games don't realize is when Street Fighter 2 came out, especially in the Bay Area, there was a cabinet on like almost every corner. Like I grew up in San Francisco, and if I walk down the street just a little bit to the laundromat, there's a Street Fighter cab. If I go a little further to 7-Eleven on Clement, there's a Street Fighter cab there. And then there's like a hobby shop on the other side of the street, and the guys there who sold their like action figures and stuff like that had an imported Super Famicom with Street Fighter 2, actually before it got an arcade release in the US. So fighting games had kind of always been around, or not always, but like as soon as I saw them, they were everywhere. I was like, oh, this is the coolest thing ever. Right?
Yeah.
Like I can get in fights with people, but it's like a video game.
Yeah.
And I'm like, my allowance is like $1, right? A week. So every weekend, my dad would take me down to 7-Eleven and give me my $1, which it was 50 cents to play. So I get 2 plays, can barely reach the controls, but I'm like, this is the coolest shit I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Right. So that was kind of where it started. I got the home version for my birthday, the Super Nintendo version, and I remember thinking like, oh my God, like the day I get this, like my life is changed. Again, I'm like at this point, like 7 or 8 years old, but I'm thinking like my life is bisected into a pre-has Street Fighter 2 and a post-has Street Fighter 2 at home.
Yeah, I remember the big deal about that was you'd have to pay quarters to keep playing, and you'd have to win to stay on. But then when the console version came out, and it was a good port, even despite the limitations of the Super Nintendo, it was the gameplay was really good on it.
Yeah.
You can play as much as you wanted.
Exactly.
You could it's like having free play, and that was a huge deal. Of course, you had to play on the pad at the time. I know there was that one arcade controller that was kind of like it wasn't like what you see like
the
in
arcade
the
stick, there was like you had the NES advantage, and I think they did an advantage for the SNES. You had some arcade sticks, but for the most part, nothing was recreating the actual feel of like the full American like hap levers or the big buttons or anything like that. But it was just, for me, I was like, that was the whole promise of home consoles back then was I can get arcade quality games at home. I don't have to pay a quarter each time. This is amazing.
Yeah.
So that was kind of like, fighting games were just there. And especially in the early 90s, like Street Fighter 2 started this boom in the same way that you might think of like Fortnite now, right? Well, Fortnite is just part of the cultural landscape, right? If you ever wonder why like so many DJs of a certain age will work Street Fighter 2 samples into their work, right?
Yeah.
It's because it was all over the place back then. Even now, you can show Ryu or Chun-Li to all kinds of people across the world, and they'll still have that connection.
Yeah, it's a staple of the culture,
Exactly.
right? So at a certain point, if something gets popular enough, then it ends up being in pop culture in different ways. And I think Street Fighter really hit that at its peak. I mean, you have like Jackie Chan dressed up as Chun-Li, and like it's Street Fighter is definitely the game that has penetrated to I would say the mainstream in the 90s. A lot of people might not believe it now, but during that time, it was such a big deal. That's why you had movies like you had the one with Jean-Claude Van Damme, and then they made that into a game.
Yeah.
And someone told me that I should do a video about that.
So actually, if you're interested in researching it further, I want to say The Verge, is either The Verge or Polygon, did a really good historical breakdown of the production of that movie. There's a lot of gnarly stuff in there. I guess JCVD and Kylie Minogue had an affair on set.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. So a lot of fun stuff there.
Yeah.
But I think what people don't realize if they weren't there was not only was Street Fighter 2 like an international phenomenon and like kind of elevated the genre of fighting games to something that everyone could recognize somehow, you know. It was also that relative to other video games, it was huge, right? So it's like now, if a video game is big, there are more people playing video games now than ever before in human history.
That's right, yeah.
But in the 90s, it was still mostly a thing for like kids or like adults, like you know, kind of like 20, 30, 40-year-olds around the time that I was a kid might remember like going on dates to arcades, but it wasn't like playing video games wasn't a major entertainment habit the way it is now.
Yeah.
So Street Fighter 2 being so big and so prolific was, oh, people like this is a video game that people might have been paying attention to for the first time since, I don't know, Tetris or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was when I started playing fighting games. It's kind of when everyone around there started playing fighting games, right? If you're into it, then you're into it. So Street Fighter 2 and then Mortal Kombat and then Killer Instinct or whatever. But that as an avid gamer as a youth, I played everything. So I played fighting games, so I'd play RPGs, I'd play first-person shooters, I'd play RTS, I'd play all kinds of different games and genres. And eventually, like, fighting games kind of fell out of like the mainstream favor a little bit because everyone's kind of doing Street Fighter but with different characters, Street Fighter but with another button, Street Fighter but with, you know, whatever, right? Like there's a distinct mold that everyone was building off of, and over time it got a little samey, and it just didn't really, it wasn't the only exciting thing happening in video games, right?
Sure, yeah.
So, you know, I would play plenty of online FPSs and RTS. Like I played Quake, I played StarCraft. Played a little bit of, you know, like Diablo, stuff like that. Like a lot of the classic Blizzard games that everyone remembers from that era if you were around. And like also, you know, Command and Conquer or whatever. Like I played a little bit of everything. And I kind of moved away from fighting games over the years, especially because you know, you can only afford so many games, right? And so your console choice would often determine like what you ended up playing for the next couple of years.
Of course, yeah. If you had the Genesis or the Super Nintendo, you go on kind of separate paths.
Exactly.
Every once in a while, there'd be the serendipitous moment where there'd be a game on both platforms, and you'd be like, hey, but then that version would be different. Like, famously, Mortal Kombat, one had the blood code
for the Genesis,
right?
The
Super Nintendo had sweat and very bad controls, if I remember. There was like a
the Super Nintendo had closer to arcade quality graphics.
Yeah, the graphics were good because the Super Nintendo just had better, I think, graphics. But it was I remember the controls were really like just like I think there was like an input delay or something like that. But so I think the Genesis version was superior if you just wanted like I think gameplay plus authenticity to the arcade version, but I don't know.
So the thing where I kind of messed up is I chose N64 over PlayStation. Okay. And I chose Macintosh over PC.
Okay. You didn't mess up on N64 still had
it depends. So like as a kid that mostly liked to play video games on his own. Yeah. Right. N64 is great for multiplayer. So I had like Star Fox 64, right? And got the controllers like or GoldenEye, right? That stuff was great. But for fighting games, we had like War Gods. I had a copy of War Gods. There was Mace the Dark Age. There was the Mortal Kombat trilogy. Yeah. Like you had Smash, obviously, right? And I played a decent amount of regular Smash, but I missed out on a lot of the JRPGs and a lot of the fighting games. Basically, because Capcom wasn't really doing Nintendo games that much back then. Yeah. Right. So there were a couple of years where I wasn't really playing that many fighting games because I was playing RTS or I was playing FPS or I was playing, you know, the N64 games, and it wasn't until sophomore year of high school, where I was messing around with an SNES ROM set because SNES was just recently emulatable. Like, you know, computers had just gotten to the point where you could reasonably emulate an SNES. Yeah. And so I'm on like a file sharing server. I download a file called Gundam Wing, and I'm like, I don't know what this is, but sounds like an interesting name. I open it up and I see a bunch of cool anime mechs. One's called Deathside, so I'm like, oh, that out of all these mechs, I'm obviously picking Deathside, right? Yeah. And the Gundam Wing fighting game for SNES was actually surprisingly good. So it does a lot of really interesting things. The characters, the art is actually more complex than most other fighting games at that point. Like they were really pushing the limits of the SNES.
Okay.
There's some neat effects that they do with like transparency on like beam attacks, and there's like a chain cancel system. So it feels really advanced to me as someone who hadn't really been playing, other than like I played a little bit of X-Men versus Street Fighter in the arcades and blah, 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 blah. But I didn't really get acquainted with those games that much. And just stumbling over a random ROM set, I find the Gundam Wing game. I'm like, this is really cool. I should see what fighting games are doing now.
Oh, okay. So that kind of was like a gateway into...
absolutely.
Or
which is why I have Gundam Wing posters right next to my Street Fighter posters up there.
Okay, so this is kind of, this is, so I guess at one point you were into fighting games because of Street Fighter 2, or maybe you were just into Street Fighter 2 mainly. And then you went the console path of the N64, which... I mean, obviously the PlayStation had, some very exclusive titles, and like you said, Capcom wasn't doing stuff for N64, and so you kind of reinvigorated your fighting game passion through the Gundam.
Yeah, so it started with Gundam, and what that got me thinking was like, oh, fighting games seem kind of like I haven't caught up with them in a little bit. I don't know what they're all about. So I went and rented a copy of Street Fighter Alpha 3. For the PlayStation. I had a PlayStation emulator on my PC at that time.
Okay.
And so I was like, oh, I can try this out. Let's see what the new Street Fighters are like. And it was World Tour mode. Just like Street Fighter 6 World Tour mode got them back, got all the new players in now. So Alpha 3 World Tour mode got me to just not think too much about what I was doing, and just it was like, oh, this is cool. There's this world map. I get to get upgrades for my character, like all this kind of stuff. That got me playing the game and seeing like, oh, this is what the art looks like right now. I also got X-Men Mutant Academy 2. That was a good one.
Okay.
And so that got me experimenting just at home with different fighting games. Actually, Gundam Wing also got me into anime. So I like to say that between introducing me to fighting games and anime, Gundam Wing basically ruined my life.
Okay.
Like I'd be a lawyer or something right now. So it saved my life, but but so I would keep the ROM set and the emulator on. You remember the zip disks? Right? 100 megabyte floppy drive.
I had a zip disk. I actually had
You remember
those.
when 100 megs was like a lot, and you're like, oh, I can just carry this around. This is
floppies
crazy.
were like what, a few megabytes? Like that was it.
So I had a zip disk that I would leave in my bag when I go to school, because the guy who ran the computer lab was like pretty chill, as long as you weren't making noise for people. He didn't care what you're doing. So after school, sometimes I would hang out and I would play ROMs off my zip disk, so I didn't have to save it on the computer hard drive or anything. And this other kid in my class came by and was like, oh, you play fighting games? I was like, yeah, like, no, but yeah, sure. Like, I didn't really know him that well, but he rolled up to school the next day with a Dreamcast, Alpha 3, CVS1, and Third Strike, as well as a gamepad and the Interact Alloy stick, which is this really weird arcade stick that the base looked like it was just like a glob of metal, basically. He set it up on one of the school, like the science room projectors. And during lunch, he just beat my ass in Alpha 3. I'm like, and I don't know how to do anything, right? So I'm like trying to do round start Raging Demon because it works against the computer and stuff like that. And I'm using Shin Akuma, and he's using like actual tournament legal characters or whatever. But that was kind of like one of the first times it actually sat down and played fighting games as someone who was also interested in playing fighting games. As a kid, when I played Street Fighter, like I would go to the arcade and get washed because I could barely use the controls, or I would play against my friends at sleepovers, and I was like the kid in my class who was good at video games. Right? Like that was my thing. So if a new video game came out, I would play it with them, and I wouldn't be doing good stuff or anything. I'd do like jump, heavy kick, sweep, right? The quintessential two-hit combo.
That's the best two-hit combo ever, right?
But eventually people don't want to play with you, right? So this is the first time that I played with someone consistently who could beat me and also like knew what he was doing and knew how to get good at these games, right? Because he would read about strategies on the internet and try and practice stuff back then.
So this is very interesting. So there's a moment, I had a moment like that, but I guess I didn't go down that deep after that moment, but it was an eye-opening moment. We all grew up playing games. Everyone's been to an arcade in our generation, and like a lot of people did probably think Street Fighter 2 was cool, even though if they didn't get into fighting games or FGC. But then, like for me, it was also the Dreamcast that kind of opened my eyes. It was Third Strike, I think. I think it was the one. Maybe there's like a game that contains Third Strike and Second Impact or something. I don't know if it was that version, but a friend had it, and he was doing like a training mode stuff.
Yeah.
Like, and that was the first time I'd ever seen a training mode in a fighting game. I was like, and that's a big moment because you're thinking, oh wait, like this is like a tool to help you get good at these kinds of games. And I knew like people like were good at the game. You know, you go to the arcade and you know that one guy's like really good. Like, and if someone can beat him, then you'd be a big deal.
Yeah.
But to see that training mode was a big deal. It's funny because that friend is now one of the guys that helped run the Jazzy circuit in Arlington, Texas. So,
that's right.
And I kind of reunited with him later after I got into the FGC.
Oh.
But he was the one that kind of got me into the idea of fighting games being more than just button mashing and two-hit combos, right? So it's very cool. Yeah. Also, I guess the Dreamcast was kind of a starting point for you in terms of opening your eyes to that kind of stuff. So I guess something that's also very interesting about you, Pat, is that you're also in game development now, right? So I don't know how much you could talk about like your history of the game development stuff. Maybe you can give kind of a general overview of like obviously you're into games, and you're into fighting games. And but games in general, and of course, people from our generation, it's kind of a dream job to work in the industry, right? I know that it's not always easy.
I understand
obviously.
why it's seen as a dream job.
Yeah, but it's kind of at one point you must have gotten into the path of doing that as a career, like you said. Instead of becoming a lawyer, which I mean, maybe things.
I don't think I ever had it cut out to be a lawyer, though. I did take a practice LSAT once.
I think you'd be good at making argumentation. And
I was a debater in high school.
I think you'd be a strong debater.
Yeah, I was actually. So the funny thing is, debate was then this will tie back into work, I promise. But in high school, I was a debater. And that was what got me comfortable with 1v1 competition. And all the hard feelings that people go through when they lose in a fighting game, they're like, oh man, that was embarrassing, right? I couldn't do anything. Getting out-argued for 45 minutes in front of a judge is excruciating, right? But I had a coach who like the first time I was like a freshman, the first time I went up against a senior, she was like, I was like, man, this sucks, I'm gonna lose, like, I'm not gonna do good at this tournament. And my coach is just like, it's a learning experience. I was like, oh, so if I lose, then it's just learning. That's great, right? Like that kind of mentality helped me get better at fighting games because I would go and I'd lose and I wouldn't care as much. And what I found was that I liked fighting games more than debate. So at debate tournaments, there's a certain generation of debater who will remember me as the kid on his laptop playing fucking Gundam Wing or Street Fighter. Or absolutely. Because in between rounds, I'd just break it out and I'd start mashing. I actually did play Gundam Wing with another dude who knew how to play it at a debate tournament once, which was great.
That's a very specific game.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially in 2002, I think is when it was, right? So years after it came out, there's this one kid at El Cerrito High who was at a debate tournament and was like, oh, you're playing Gundam Wing? Hold up, let me see my Shenlong. And I was like, all right, we're about to do this.
Okay.
Yeah, go Gauchos. Anyway, so I had always been into fighting games for a long time, but I'd also, like I said, been into games in general. And growing up, I tried to get into programming, but it was really hard to access as a kid, especially with not much resources around me. Like I'd try and get books every now and then, but I had no idea what I was doing. And it felt hopeless. But I did like writing. And so in high school, I started writing as just kind of like freelancing or actually doing stuff for free at first. Writing about shareware games and occasionally reviewing stuff or covering news, that kind of thing. Just like on the side while also being a student. And I didn't really have much in the way of explicit career goals throughout high school and college, other than at one point I wanted to work in an arcade. But it's like, even then I was like, yeah, this is not a career, right? So I'd been writing about games for a long time, and my first kind of full-time job out of college, I was working for PC World magazine. I was running their how-tos. I would also like review TVs. I reviewed some Wi-Fi stuff, But we had a little bit of games coverage, so I'd also do games coverage. I freelanced for a couple different publications as well, so I had like a little bit of a writing portfolio that I'd been building up. I'd covered E3 a couple times, et cetera. And I knew that I didn't want to stay in the kind of the consumer publishing area because it felt like it was not quite as interesting, right? Like technology when we were growing up with it, like in the 90s, is like all constantly new stuff coming out, and oh my god, like computers can do way much more, and year over year you're seeing these really impressive differences. by the time we got to like the mid-aughts and then like the early 2010s, like stuff kind of stabilized a little bit. Smartphones were exciting. TVs were kind of a commodity. Most of what I was doing was teaching old people how to uninstall the new Windows and reinstall XP. Like that's
mandatory
what we
skill.
Doing. Yeah, absolutely. Right. And you know, honestly, something which like learning how to use and diagnose a PC and like really learn my way around it was very good for me. Don't get me wrong, right? I still help people with that kind of stuff all the time, like even in a semi-professional capacity. But I knew I didn't want to stay in consumer side stuff. And there was this publication, it's still around actually, it's called Insert Credit. It used to be like a video game blog, now it's more of a podcast. The Insert Credit homies are near and dear friends of mine. Actually, the founder and editor-in-chief and whatever other title is, he lives like half a mile down the street. His name's Brandon. He was the editor-in-chief of Game Developer Magazine at the time. And I knew that I wanted, I knew that he was doing more interesting work than what I was doing. And that moving away from consumer-facing work would let me talk to people, like talk to more professionals about more interesting things, right? I think game development is a fascinating industry, right? You're constructing fantasy, right? And it is there's just so much interesting work going on there that I was like, well, this is way more interesting than what I'm doing. And it's also not the kind of gig that your average games writer would necessarily be good for covering, because most of what games writers do, or especially we're doing at the time, was focused on reviews, previews, like consumer access stuff, which just wasn't really what I wanted to do. So I worked with Brandon on Insert Credit stuff, got to know him. Eventually, he brought me in to backfill him as editor-in-chief of Game Developer Magazine. So I did that for a year and a half, and it was super fun. I got to work with, so the GDC is by the same parent company, so I got to work with a lot of people in games, got to learn more about how they do their stuff at indie level all the way to AAA. Got to meet some like absolute legends in the field.
It's kind of your writing got you into this, opened the doors to all this, because you were writing for Game Developer Magazine, which is
editing more than writing, but yes.
Editing, okay, But I mean, you got in with the game developers through your.
That was how I started to get closer to the industry, right?
Okay.
But the other thing was, as a fighting game player, you get closer to the core guts of the game than most other genres do.
Oh yeah.
These days, it's like, you know, you have speedrunners; they're also very close to the guts. Or like if you're high level in anything, you probably understand like some pretty intricate nuances of how the stuff works. But especially in like late teens, like late aughts, early 2010s, fighting game players were some of the kind of the most notoriously hardcore out of the bunch, right? We generally had a rep, right? And so like when people would introduce me to other professionals, they'd be like, oh, he's the editor-in-chief of Game Developer Magazine, but he also plays fighting games. So like I got to know a lot of professionals, and we would bond over our shared love of fighting games. I remember, I don't know if you know the folks at Clay Entertainment. They did like Mark of the Ninja. Also, I think Don't Starve was theirs. But Jamie Cheng is their founder and CEO, and he liked Third Strike. So we talked a lot about Third Strike. And actually, I just randomly ran into him on Fightcade a couple of years ago, and he beat me. I was like, oh, good stuff, man. Keeping it alive. But everyone who works in the industry has a reason for getting into games professionally. And for a lot of them, fighting games, just like us, was the thing that really kind of got its hooks into us.
I do think I have kind of a theory about like, saying that you're into fighting games is kind of seen a bit differently, right? And in a game design sense, I think just understanding how fighting games work and playing it to the level of where now you're comfortable playing it does require like kind of intricate details and knowledge about the game that perhaps in like other genres you wouldn't have to have that in order to enjoy, right? So like the things about fighting games is just on the surface it's not very intuitive, whereas like in a first-person shooter, what it's like, you can imagine what it'd be like to do some tactical, missions on a SWAT team or something, and you can go around it, and then you have to aim, and then of course a headshot will do more damage than like a leg shot or whatever. And there's a lot of things that are intuitive where you can understand, but you can do that without, you can enjoy that without knowing the very specific details of like, how the damage works. Of course, the high level players will have that. But I feel like with fighting games, like if you are to get to a certain level, you have to like understand, like even understanding the idea of a combo. It's like, kind of intuitive, but kind of not. Because like, if you're like a boxer can do a 2-hit combo, but there's nothing about that 2-hit combo that the boxer did where the person couldn't have evaded the second attack necessarily, right? But in a game, it's fixed in a combo. But unless it's like Tekken, where it's like they'll call it a combo, but then they'll say it's a natural combo versus not, and then that confuses things further. Tekken 3D,
I guess the example that I would draw is, how, especially as someone who is a lover of video and film, right? As a medium, there's the first action movie you ever watch might be the greatest thing you ever see, right? And you're watching it uncritically. All you see is the stuff that's in front of you happen, and you're like, wow, this was incredible, this was amazing. Then, I don't know, do you remember what the first movie was where you're like, oh, movies can be bad, I don't think I liked that?
I don't remember that, but I know a friend who told me that exact line. The first moment he realized movies can be bad was the Super Mario Brothers movie.
Like the 90s one.
Yeah, the 90s one. The original, the one with like, I didn't even see that one.
John Leguizamo was in that one, I think? Maybe not.
Yeah, but like I saw the trailers for that and I was just like, oh, pass. Because like, this is like, when I think of Mario Brothers, I think of like,
it looked nothing
cute,
like Mario.
Fluffy, characters that can be plush dolls, but like, it's just like this really live action, serious kind of.
And so now, if we went and we watched that Mario movie, I'm sure you and I would watch it and go, whoa, this is really cool, actually, right? Like, have you ever seen it?
No, I never, I only saw the trailers.
It is, if you are a Mario fan, you probably wouldn't want to watch it to be a Mario fan. But as someone who works in a creative industry and works with film, you'd probably look at it and go, whoa, this is an interesting way that they did like Koopas, for example, or Sewer City or whatever. Right. So like now, if we watch a movie together, we can look at the craft that goes into any shot. Right?
Sure, yeah.
But that's something that the people who make movies don't want you to do usually, right? They like, if the true enthusiast or the professional looks at it, there's something that you want to see how people appreciate it at that level.
Sure.
But these are being made for people to consume and to take in without thinking about how it's made.
Yeah.
Fighting games also, like any video game, has a similar level of abstraction, right? Or the suspension of disbelief, where in video games, when you're making a video game, you don't want a player to think about the controls, or you don't want them to try and understand how the animation canceling system works.
Yeah.
You just want them to think of a thing, and then they do it, and it just works, because then they feel like a genius, and you know they're not a genius. You know that you deliberately made that game to make them feel like a genius, right? But fighting games, that falls apart almost immediately, because there's nothing natural, like you said, there's nothing natural about learning how to play a fighting game.
Yeah.
If you are into it, either you're into it for the button mashing, and that usually lasts for a while, right? Yeah. But if you're into it after the button mashing, it's because you want to know how the thing works.
Yeah.
And so that layer where you go from being just trying to think of what you want to do to, wait, what does this game want me to do?
Yeah.
How does this game work exactly? Why is it that sometimes when I input this thing, this happens, and sometimes when I input the same input, something else happens, right? Learning to understand it at that level is something that fighting game players have to do by necessity. That's the game, right? Is learning how to operate these characters and how to operate these systems. And that's something that most other genres don't really want you to do, or at least didn't want you to do back then. So it was a good way to get into a kind of a more, we'll say like a kind of high level of detail when thinking about video games. And when I was working at Game Developer Magazine, that basically it was a great gig, loved doing it. Magazines don't last that long, right? Especially like this was, I think 2011 was when I started. The magazine shut down in 2013. There's still a web presence. Actually now Game Developer is back. It's Gama Sutra was the website, now Game Developer is the website, blah, 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 blah. But that magazine's like print is not long for this world, at least back then for publishing. So I had to go find something else to do. And it was right around that time that Riot was looking to build up their publishing presence. And specifically what they wanted was someone to help curate their news stream for League of Legends so that basically the stuff that you see in the client, right, or back from the patching screen, the stuff you see in the patching screen, they needed someone to watch over that and make sure there wasn't like 2-month-old stuff there, or that we were plugging the right sales, blah 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 blah.
Yeah, makes sense.
So I went from being the editor-in-chief of Game Developer Magazine to being the editor-in-chief of League of Legends, which is a really weird job title when you think about it.
It's hard to imagine exactly what that would entail.
But video games publish in this case is like mostly written content, but some videos, to their players all the time, right? Sometimes it's like if you log into SF6 and you see like the Battle Hub updates or whatever.
Okay.
You know, it's someone's job to make sure that that stuff is up to date, that it's showing the right information, blah, 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 blah. That was my job for 2 years.
Yeah.
And then I see a trailer for a game called Rising Thunder. That is being, the pre-alpha is being shown at EVO, and I was like, oh. So I guess I neglected to mention that as a side gig, I had been working for Shoryuken.com back when they were a thing.
Oh, yeah.
I was their, I believe I was their features editor for most of the time that I was working for them. And so some folks of a certain age in fighting games will remember my writing from Shoryuken.com. I did a lot of real fun stuff there. First, I was writing my own stuff, and then I was working with other writers to kind of commission them for pieces and mentor them and you know, edit their stuff and so on. But I grew to know Tom Cannon and Tony, the Evo founders, from doing that.
They also founded SRK.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I actually knew Tom and Tony from when they were running tournaments in Sunnyvale too. Tom was running Guilty Gear XX for a while at Sunnyvale when I was in high school. I actually just finished high school.
Okay.
So I remember playing against Bridget a little bit back then. But I'd been working for them for SRK for a little bit. And then I went over to Riot. I knew once they were started showing Rising Thunder, I was like, oh, they're working on a fighting game. There are not that many studios in North America who are working on fighting games. And the ones that are, right, like I think at this point, I remember playing a little bit of Skullgirls, which was great. Love the Future Club homies. That is, it's they're very much their own studio, right? Fighting games is something they're obviously really good at, but they've done a lot of other stuff since then, like Invisible, etc. And then there's NetherRealm, right? But the Mortal Kombat style of games has never really appealed to me. I'm also, the older I get, the more squeamish I get about violence. So I wasn't really looking to work for most fighting game studios in NA, and honestly, most of that stuff is in Japan anyway. But I liked the cannons. I liked Rising Thunder when I played it. I was a Crow main. I played...
Same here, Crow main.
Hell yeah.
Let's go.
I remember, because I didn't understand any of the Korean, right? Because because I ended up working for Radiant afterwards. What happened was I left Riot to work for Radiant. I was their community manager. And that was a super fun gig. It was really neat. Actually, I have a Rising Thunder banner from when we were going to trade shows and stuff.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's over there.
Oh, nice.
I made sure we kept it.
Keep that forever.
Yeah, exactly. Got a big old dauntless on it, I think. But so I was a community manager for them for 6 months, and then we got acquired by Riot.
Okay.
And so I've been
you're
working
kind of back, but in a different position, different capacity.
Well, so here's the thing, right? When you go from community manager on a live game to, okay, now we don't have a live game anymore. That means we don't need a community manager. But they still needed people who know fighting games. And I like to say that fighting games are really, really hard, right? It's hard to get good at them. Often, if you're really good at fighting games, it is also hard to spend an equivalent amount of time on the kinds of things you need to do to hold down like a real good job. So one of the reasons that fighting game expertise is actually pretty rare in game development is if you're a game developer, you had to get good at something else to be a game developer. Right? Which means you probably appreciate the craft of playing fighting games really well, but you might not have developed that skill for yourself. So in my case, I was able to transition from community manager to a game designer. And you know, there was a lot that I had to learn. Like I had to learn how to use Unreal. You know, when we were starting out on early development stuff. I started out working on very early champions, and then I moved into meta system iteration. So stuff like social systems and like network features, that kind of thing. How do we make friends through video games? This kind of stuff. Which is actually what got me into TOing.
Oh, okay. So TOing came after after you you went back to Riot. Okay. Yeah,
because so what happened there was funny was, one, I got really into Guilty Gear Xrd, and I knew that there were people around me who wanted to play the game more, and that we could kind of inject a little bit more life into our scene if we had more opportunities to play. But I also knew that no one else was really going to pick up the mantle of running brackets for it. So I was like, I remember sitting down to dinner with my wife Irene at one point and being like, man, I think I'm going to have to just sit down and run some tournaments for this. And so we started running Xrd every other week at Wednesday Night Fights Oakland. This was like 2018, I think. So well after, like, that was like a year or two after Rev 2 came out. Xrd was already kind of like on its way out at that point. But one of the reasons I got into it was I had learned a lot about socialization through fighting games. I'd studied the arcades, right? I'd kind of gone back and analyzed my own experiences in arcades to try and understand what it was about them that felt so compelling, and also why like matchmaking queues did not feel compelling. Why I didn't feel like I was making friends in matchmaking queues.
Yeah.
And through studying that and doing some of the kind of early design prototyping that would eventually lead to our lobby system, I decided that I needed to get my hands dirty, right? I needed to actually test some of this stuff out for myself.
Yeah.
And building software can be really expensive, especially for early prototyping, right? Like, it's, you know, you need engineers, you need time, you need play testers, that kind of thing. But I can just tell people to show up and I'm going to run a bracket. I can do that.
Yeah.
Right?
It's completely doable.
Yeah. So a lot of my early TOing actually started because I'd been studying how community formation works. There's actually a really good book. I think it's called The Art of Community. I can recommend it to you. Yeah.
I think I mentioned that book in one of my videos, actually.
The author's from Oakland.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But I read that book to try and understand what kind of features we could develop or what kind of experiences we could make to make online play feel more like the in-person experience, which I loved, which is super formative for me. And in doing so, I realized that I had to try and test some of this out. And that I couldn't test it out at work because the pace of development would be too slow and it'd be expensive. But if I picked it up as a hobby, then I could iterate all I wanted.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the work that inevitably I won't say inevitable because it wasn't inevitable, but the work that ended up leading to what I will maybe somewhat, let's see, how do I put this? Somewhat selfishly called the revival of Guilty Gear Xrd Rev 2 was I needed a way to test this out. I needed a way to test out some of my theories about skill acquisition, community building, and friendship formation, all these things that I knew were possible through fighting games, but I could not test it out in the standard 9 to 5.
Okay. So building upon these ideas that you've had, you were also able to test them and see what worked and what didn't work with community.